She was tied to a weathered fence post behind the saloon, her arms raised above her head like a rusted scarecrow. Her bare feet were caked with mud up to her ankles, and a tattered muslin dress clung to her body as if it were soaked paper. The rough rope had rubbed her wrists raw, blistered from every small movement. She looked no older than 12, perhaps even younger, frail as a fence rail, and quieter than the breeze. Nobody knew her name, nobody even bothered to ask. The crowd around her was loud with laughter, spitting and gambling, but their attention was not on her. They were inside, playing cards and drinking whiskey with the women upstairs. Yet when a child was left tied in plain sight of the town's only saloon, some men grew curious, others angry, and the worst became interested. One such man rested against a broken hitching post, chewing his jerky thoughtfully while peering through the dusty air. "Gambler's kid," he muttered, "owes every man in town, and they are using her to settle what he cannot at the card table." He sounded unsurprised, and no one else seemed shocked either. Then the wind shifted, swirling dust across the trail as a rider appeared. Tall in the saddle, worn hat low, threadbare coat, and eyes unblinking and hard. His name was Jack Johnson, 40 years old. A man with no children and a ranch falling apart, one he struggled to hold together without breaking himself down every morning. That day, Jack was not headed into town. He was merely dropping off old tools for sharpening and maybe planning to pick up some supplies. But as he passed the alley and caught sight of the girl's sunken cheeks and trembling arms weighed down by the effort to remain upright, his horse came to a sudden halt. He even asked for it. He remained there a moment, jaw clenched, rein easing, watching and listening. Suddenly, a loud voice pierced the silence. $12 for the girl, 1 week's work, or permanent, your choice. She's small, but doesn't eat much. The girl did not lift her head. The gambler, thin and sour-smelling, missing half a smile, strolled toward the post and gave the rope a pull, as if she were livestock. She can clean, wash, cook, a bit tougher than she seems, and dumb as dirt, won't talk back. No one moved. The crowd slowly shifted away, losing interest. Too ugly a scene even for this town. Then Jack dismounted. He didn't look at the gambler or say a word. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded cloth bundle filled with coins that clinked. The gambler narrowed his eyes. 15. Jack nodded once. You want her for the week? No permanent? Jack hesitated for a moment. I'm not buying her, just settling your debt. The gambler laughed. Same difference. He threw the rope into the dirt like it meant nothing. She's yours. Jack stayed silent. He approached, knelt, and cut the girl loose with his pocket knife. Her arms were shaky, she stumbled, and he caught her, not roughly but not gently either. She looked up in surprise, then quickly away. No tears showed, only wide, empty eyes that had long stopped begging for kindness. They left town under a sky turning grey. She did not ride behind him. He let her ride the mule alone. The reins were tied loosely to his horse, and she clung to the saddle. Her fingers gripped the horn, knuckles pale as she held on tight. Her face turned away from the road as dust swirled behind them like restless spirits not yet at peace, murmuring secrets. Jack Johnson's ranch lay about 10 miles to the west, tucked between 2 rugged cliffs and bordered by cottonwood trees stripped bare for winter. The barn was partially broken down from a recent storm, the roof still leaking from the one before. Chickens roamed freely, while a fence post leaned crookedly near the front gate. Jack had not found time to fix it. The girl absorbed everything in silence as he led her inside the modest and sparsely furnished house. Inside, a pot of beans simmered softly on the stove, the only source of warmth in the room. A wool blanket lay neatly folded on the cot beside the fireplace. He pointed at it, saying, "That's yours." She stood motionless, then nodded once in response. Not wasting a moment, he scooped beans into a dented tin bowl and placed it on the table. Sitting down, she did not reach for the spoon, simply gazing at it as if unsure of its purpose. "You don't have to eat it quickly," he said in a softer tone. Hesitantly, she picked up the spoon, careful not to spill, and when the warm beans touched her tongue, her face tightened, not from heat, but from unfamiliarity with the taste. He understood that she had never known the comfort of warm food or sitting while eating. She did not finish the meal, only muttering a quiet thank you that seemed to come from somewhere deep and hidden. He asked no questions, shared no stories, simply lit a lamp, tended the fire, and said, "I don't lock the doors. You're safe here." She nodded again, but remained still as he stepped outside to unhitch the mule. Night descended quickly, and the wind blew sharply through the canyon as nearby. Coyotes howled beyond the ridge. Jack gazed up at the stars, his mind restless, questioning what kind of trouble he had brought into his life. When he returned inside, she was asleep, curled tightly on the cot, arms wrapped around herself as if tethered to some unseen bond. At midnight, a floorboard creaked beneath the weight of her steps. Jack sat upright in his chair, his hand instinctively resting on the rifle beside him. The girl stood before him, her eyes glazed with fear. "Do not lock me in the barn," she whispered. He lowered the rifle and said, "I will not. I have been confined before." He expected silence. She went back to her cot and curled up once more. Neither of them found sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, frost shimmered on the window pane as the sun rose blood-red behind the ridge, casting elongated shadows across the kitchen floor. Jack poured water into the kettle, his hand trembling slightly. He told himself it was the chill in the air. Outside, a hawk circled above, while the girl remained on the cot, wide awake, staring fixedly at the ceiling. Jack Johnson did not know her background, nor did he feel the need to. He had witnessed far worse from men with even less reason. What mattered was that the first thing she asked was not for food or a name, but a promise not to be locked away. Perhaps that was enough for the moment. She woke with the sunrise, even though Jack had not told her to rise. No bell or call, only the natural rhythm of someone accustomed to hardship. The quilt had slipped halfway off during the night, but she had not shifted. She lay still, eyes open and breathing softly as if she were invisible. Unsure if the warmth was genuine, Jack was already outside chopping firewood beside the shed, his coat casually draped over one shoulder. Each strike of the axe echoed through the canyon, sounding like a warning to the cold. The girl lingered at the edge of the porch, uncertain whether to ask permission or simply walk forward. She chose neither, and when he noticed her, he just nodded towards the car with a jerk of his chin. "The chickens need feeding, the corn is in the sack." Without a word, she went barefoot, her toes disappearing into the frost-covered grass. By the time Jack finished stacking the wood, she had returned her hands red from the cold, with bits of straw clinging to her skirt. He half expected a complaint, but she offered none instead, sitting on the steps with her knees pulled close, watching the road like someone might come to take her away. They did not speak until breakfast. Jack had a habit of baking once a week, though most days his bread came out as hard as roofing tile. This time it was still warm with a golden crust, the smell filling the small house like something sacred. He placed a piece on her plate beside a spoonful of honey and watched without pretending not to. She did not move. "You can eat it." She looked at him. "All of it?" He hesitated. "Of course, why else is it there?" Her hands hovered over the bread as if it might disappear. If she touched it wrong, she slowly tore a piece off, held it to her lips, then stopped. "Should I save some for later?" He leaned back his chair. The creek groaned beneath his weight. "There will be more later." She fixed her gaze on him, uncertain if he was truthful. He did not insist, simply rose, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stared out the window as if the landscape could soothe the unnamed pain inside him. After breakfast, she swept the floor repeatedly, even though it did not require it. She scrubbed the stove's black iron surface until it shone like a mirror, and folded her blanket twice more before dusk. Jack attempted to tell her she did not need to do all this, but whenever he spoke, her eyes widened as if expecting a blow that never came. "I do not know what to do with warm bread." he murmured to himself that night amidst the silence. During the following week, they found a pattern not of comfort but of mere routine. She accompanied him while he inspected the fence line, struggling to keep up. When she tripped on a loose stone and grazed her knee, she clenched her teeth and kept moving. He paused, handed her a cloth and said, "It is no shame to feel pain." She only nodded, quietly wiping the blood away. On the fourth evening, he found her outside near the barn, curled up beneath a wheelbarrow. She was not sleeping, only hiding. When asked what she was doing, she whispered, "Just checking if the door locks from the outside." He crouched beside her, voice low. "Nothing here does that." She remained silent, but that night she chose to sleep closer to the fire. A week went by, and then another, until the neighbour finally spoke up. "Who is the girl?" asked Hank Sutter as he stopped by the well with his question hanging in the air. The horse, Jack, gave a look and said, "None of your business," raising an eyebrow. Sutter replied, "Not saying it's wrong, just unusual. Everything strange is not always bad," Jack said before walking away. By the third week, she had started humming softly, but only when she thought no one was near. A slightly off tune, but steady, like a young bird learning its song. Jack pretended not to hear. She never asked about his wife. The grave behind the barn had no name, only a stone worn smooth by time. One morning, the girl left a flower there, a single Danesian blossom crushed and dry from the season, but placed with care. Later, he asked, "Do you miss someone?" She said nothing, but that night she whispered, "I used to have a brother." She didn't say anything else. Spring was slowly pushing its way forward. The snow had melted from the ridge, and birds had returned, their songs filling the cottonwood trees. One morning, she found a robin's egg broken open in the grass. She picked it up and brought it inside, holding the fragile blue shell like it might shatter. Jack watched her from the porch and thought she was broken too, yet she handled things with tenderness. The first time she laughed happened by accident. Jack had burned the cornbread so black it looked like coal. Muttering that the loaf was wasted, she tried to keep a straight face, but a small snort slipped out before she could hide it. Then she froze, her hand covering her mouth. Jack didn't laugh, but smiled, saying it was about time because he thought maybe she had forgotten how to. She lowered her head while still smiling quietly behind her hand. That month, they had only a single visitor, a wandering tinkerer who had once played cards with Jack Johnson during better times. The man immediately noticed the girl, assuming she was hired help. "Not your family," Jack said simply. The man grunted in response. Jack then turned to her and said, "Go inside." She obeyed. When the man glanced back, Jack's voice turned firm. "Don't ask about her again. She's none of my concern." That very night, she remained at the table longer than usual and finally asked, "Will you sell me back?" Jack blinked in surprise. "What? Men buy girls and then sell them again? That is how it works." He placed his coffee down. "That's not what happened." She tilted her head uncertainly. "Then what was it?" He searched for words carefully, taking his time. "I think I saw someone drowning, and maybe I was too, so I pulled you out. And you," he hesitated, "you pulled me too." She said nothing more, nor did she question it again. On the 12th night, she handed him a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" he asked. "My name." "You already told me." "Not my real one," she replied. He opened the paper, revealing shaky small letters written as if they were a promise. Lena. Jack kept silent for a while, then nodded quietly. "All right then, Lena." She smiled as if she had just been allowed to truly exist. The next morning, Lena carried in some kindling, poured coffee, and placed 2 plates on the table without being asked. When Jack sat down, he noticed a warm slice of bread on his plate, not placed by him, but by her. She watched intently as he took the first bite, chewing with care and thoughtfulness. Jack raised an eyebrow and said, "A little dry." She smiled back. "You did not complain about mine." He laughed for the first time since his wife had passed. Outside, the wind carried birdsong through the hills. Inside, the fire burned steadily, and for the first time in years, Jack Johnson did not have to eat breakfast alone, not in his stomach and not in his very bones. The wind changed mood the morning they came. Jack sensed something was wrong even before the dust began to rise on the road. The birds fell silent and the air grew tight with anticipation, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. He was chopping wood when the dog growled low and steady, ears pinned back. Jack stood upright, wiped his hands on his pants, and glanced towards the east. 3 riders approached slowly, the kind of slow that meant they were in no rush because they expected everyone else to wait for them. Lena was inside washing beans. She had not seen the visitors yet. Jack did not call her. The men dismounted before reaching the gate. The first man wore a preacher's collar, stiff and immaculate, despite the ride, yet his eyes showed no warmth. The second was a lawman, his badge tilted, mustache neatly trimmed. The third man needed no introduction. His eyes alone were enough, sharp, cold, and narrow. He bore the gambler's smirk and the same strong jawline as Jack. That morning, Jack said in an even voice, even the preacher stepped forward. "Mr. Boone, that is correct. I am Reverend Hatch. This is Deputy Slater, and that man is Mr. Caleb Dawes." Jack nodded once slowly and asked what brought Caleb Dawes here. Caleb spat into the dirt and said, "My brother sold. Jack sold me a story he had no right to tell. Without hesitation, he deceived me. The girl was chained to a post behind the saloon. I gave him money to set her free." Deputy Slater cleared his throat, reminding me that a coin did not erase legal matters. She was considered property resolved through a wager, and there was official documentation. "She is not an animal," Jack insisted. "She is a child." Reverend Hatch folded his hands as if in prayer, but spoke sharply. "We are not here to debate philosophy. You are sheltering stolen property under your roof. Unless you can provide proof of guardianship, the child must be returned." Jack felt a cold certainty flicker inside, something beyond anger. These men had already decided their course. She is safer here than anywhere else. She eats, sleeps, and is not chained or afraid. That does not make it legal, the deputy declared. Lena appeared silently on the porch. Her hair was braided, sleeves rolled up, and her apron stained with flour. Though small in the doorway, she carried herself with unwavering strength. Caleb's eyes met hers, curling into a smile that twisted Jack's stomach. "Lena," the preacher said calmly, "come here now. We will take you home. This man has done his part." She did not move. "Girl," Caleb growled, "you belong to our family. You were promised." Jack stepped forward between them. "She is not going, deputy." Slater's hand moved near his hip with a warning. "Are you sure you want to make this official, Boone? Do you really want to be known as someone who obstructs the law?" Jack stood firm. Jack glanced back at Lena. Her eyes no longer showed fear. Instead, they were filled with determination. She said she did not need rescuing anymore. "You have 7 days," Jack said. "Bring back the documents or do not return at all." Reverend Hatch's jaw clenched tightly. "The Lord disapproves of defiance when faced with justice." Jack remained silent. The 3 men mounted their horses again as dust quickly enveloped them, but the tension did not leave the air with their departure. Lena was the first to speak. "They will come back, right?" "Yes," Jack replied. Then she turned and walked inside as if she had just added one more task to her already long list of chores, like feeding the hens and sweeping the porch. That night, Jack could not find rest. He sat in the rocking chair near the fire, watching the flames flicker like anxious hearts. His mind strayed to his wife, her gentle nature, and the quiet ways she soothed wounds with tea and silence. Lena was nothing like her, and maybe that was why this felt different. Not a replacement, but a reckoning. Lena stayed up late as well, reading from an old hymn book, moving her lips silently without singing. At one point she whispered, "If they come back and take me, what will you do?" He did not look at her and simply replied, That depends on how loudly you scream. The week flew by. Jack sent a wire to a lawyer in Junction Bluff, an old army comrade who once owed him a favor, but the law moved slowly out here, even more sluggish than horses. He knew better than to expect those papers before the deadline. On the fourth day, he taught Lena how to hold a rifle. Not to shoot anyone, he said, but to be ready. Feel the weight, to realize you are not powerless. She nodded and held it gently like a newborn calf, not with fear, but with care. On the fifth day, they worked together to repair part of the fence. Her hands blistered, but she did not complain. On the sixth day, she requested to sleep outside for just one night, saying, "I want to know what to do if I ever have to run again." Jack spread a blanket beside her under the stars. They did not speak because words were unnecessary. The seventh morning arrived pale and still, the kind of silence that precedes something breaking. Shortly after sunrise, a wagon creaked along the road. It was not the law or the preacher, but a woman with skin darkened by the sun, sunken eyes, and a voice as rough as gravel. She stepped down slowly, leaning on a carved cane. When she saw Lena, she dropped the cane. "Mama," Lena whispered, barely audible. Jack froze. The woman appeared no older than 30, but looked 60 from grief. She fell to her knees before Lena and held her so tightly the girl gasped. "I thought you were dead," the woman sobbed. "I told them I would come back. I told them not to hurt you." Lena replied quietly, "They sold me." Her mother choked on her words. "I came back, but they told me you were gone. They lied." Jack stepped back, unsure where he fit in this moment. Lena turned to him. "This is my mama." He nodded slowly, understanding. Her mother rose on unsteady legs. "I got a shack near Cotton Bend. It is nothing fancy, but it is ours. I came to bring her home." Jack looked at her worn dress, thin shoes, and bruised arms. She looked like a ghost. Jack struggled to recall how to live Lena. He glanced up at her and waited quietly. No words were needed. She walked closer to him. Her mother reached out to take her hand, then turned to him and asked, "Jack, will you come with us?" He hesitated, blinking slowly. "Just to help us secure the place," she added. His throat tightened as she stepped forward and gently wrapped her small hand around his weathered one. "It belongs to you as well," she said. By noon, the wagon was moving forward, 3 souls embarking on a second chance. Somewhere along the trail, the preacher's words dissolved into the dust, losing meaning, but the sound of a girl calling a man family for the first time would resonate across the plains forever. Their journey was slow, not because the mule was exhausted, but because trust requires patience, and no one wanted to risk breaking it. The path to Cotton Bend twisted through scrubby land, where twisted, low-hanging trees clung to the red earth as if they had survived countless storms trying to uproot them. Lena rode in the back of the wagon, wrapped in a blanket, while her mother slept beside her, her head tilted and mouth open from weariness. Jack walked next to the mule, hand on the reins, his boots dragging slightly in the dust. He had not intended to travel this far, yet when Lena requested it, he could not refuse. Not since that night when she whispered, "Do not lock me in the barn." As the sun began to set, the shabby shack appeared ahead, a sloping roof balancing against a rocky ridge, its walls mended with tin and wood that had borne too many winters. Smoke from a thin trail of smoke spiraled upward, lazy and blue. Nearby, a crooked windmill creaked as it turned, while the scent of pine sap filled the air, thick and heavy. "Is that Jack?" he asked, and Lena nodded quietly, but her mother Mara looked straight ahead, as if recalling every potion she had ever brewed. Inside the cabin, they reached the door, which protested loudly as it opened. Inside was better than Jack had anticipated. The place was swept clean and dry, furnished with a small table and a single cot. A few jars were neatly arranged on a shelf. On the wall, a child's drawing was pinned up with a rusty nail. A woman, a girl, and a cottage painted red. The red had faded over time, like a memory worn too thin. Lena whispered, She held on to this. Her mother smiled faintly and said, "It was the only thing I could carry for a while." Jack helped start a fire by gathering dry wood, striking his flint carefully, feeding the flames until they crackled warmly. He stayed silent, understanding when to give space, and this cabin was heavy with quiet. That evening, Lena prepared beans with flatbread as Mara dozed, waking only to murmur that the bread reminded her of home. Jack slept outdoors. At dawn, the wind shifted again and he caught a sharp smell, smoke, but not from cooking. It was wildfire. He snapped upright and saw the western ridge glowing faintly orange, like a dying ember flickering back to life. He sprinted back to the cabin where Lena stood barefoot, watching the horizon. "It's moving," she said. Jack scanned the trees. "The wind's pushing it east. If it crosses the canyon, it will reach us before sunset." Mara remained silent, tense. They stumbled out behind them, coughing. "What do we do now?" "We run," Jack said. But Lena stayed frozen, her gaze fixed on the small shed next to the cabin. "Mama's things are in there, my books, her papers," she whispered. Jack glanced up at the sky. "It's not worth risking your life." Lena looked at her mother's face. "What if we don't come back?" Mara's expression crumpled. Jack made the decision for both of them. "You'll grab it, you prepare the mule." Lena opened her mouth to argue, but he was already moving. The shed was secured with a bent nail. Jack pried it loose with his knife and pushed the door open. Inside were a trunk, old linens, and a bundle of dried herbs. He took what he could, stuffed them into his coat, and dashed back as the first ash began to fall. By afternoon, the fire had crested the ridge. Trees shrieked as they burned. Smoke engulfed the valley like a closing fist. They escaped just in time. Behind them, the ridge glowed red, angry and alive, devouring everything. Mara wept quietly, but Lena did not. She watched the flames and murmured, "It took everything again." Jack looked at her. "Not everything." They rode until they reached a creek where the water still ran clear and cold. They camped there, brewed coffee from the last of their grounds, and spoke little that night. Lena sat beside Jack, their backs resting against a rock, still warm from the day's sun. "I thought if we came here, maybe something would heal," she said softly. "It did," he replied. She turned to him, whispering, "How can you say that? The fire took everything." "Fire burns what's dead," Jack said, "but it also clears the way for new life. Do not destroy what is already living, Lena." She blinked deliberately, as if absorbing those words slowly. I kept repeating them in my mind, phrase by phrase. "This place could heal what was broken," she whispered, "that I might find Mama in her house again, and somehow everything would feel right. But all I saw were the remains of what we had lost." He nodded and said that did not mean it was not worth holding on to in memory, yet she did not have to be trapped by it. She said nothing, but when he got up to walk back toward the fire, she followed without hesitation. At dawn, they returned to the scorched remains of the cabin. The walls were charred black and one side had collapsed, but something near the tree stump outside caught Lena's attention. A book lay there, singed but still whole. She picked it up carefully, brushing off the ash. Inside was her drawing, untouched by the flames. Holding it close to her chest, she smiled for the first time in many days. "Fire had not destroyed everything," she said softly. "Not everything," Jack replied, "not even close." As they prepared the mule again, Mara leaned on Jack's arm longer than necessary. "You did not have to go through all this," she said quietly. "No, but I am glad I did," he answered. She studied him a moment. "Have you ever thought about building something that lasts again?" Jack took a moment before responding, but Lena looked on between them, silent and hopeful, as only someone who has known loss can be. Jack placed the book in the saddlebag and said, "Let's get home first. Then we will see what still has the strength to grow." They turned toward the road. Behind them, the ridge still smoldered, but ahead the breeze carried the scent of rain. By the time they reached the ranch, the fence Jack was gone. He gazed at the smouldering remains. The charred posts still hissed faintly beneath the ashes, as if the ground itself was mourning. The wind brought with it a harsh scent of burnt oil, singed rope, and anger. This was not a wildfire. It was something deliberate and cruel, planned by human hands. Lena stepped carefully down from the mule, her mother gripping the saddle tightly, trembling. Her eyes were wide with a fear she could not express, but Lena, only 12 years old, with blistered feet and a heart worn thin by hardship, just stood still, not scared and not shocked. Jack silently walked the perimeter. There were boot prints everywhere, at least 3 pairs. He could tell by their depth that one man limped, Caleb Doss. They had waited, observed, and when the house was empty, they took their chance. Inside, the furniture was overturned. Jack's wife's rocking chair was smashed with a hatchet. The rifle was missing along with his ledger. Scrawled on the door in charcoal was a single word: thief. Mara covered her mouth in shock, but Lena stepped forward, her fingers brushing the black letters. "They want to frighten us," she said. "That is all this is." Jack looked at her intently and saw something new, something forged in the harsh red light of the fire, something unbreakable. The girl who once whispered, "Don't lock me in the barn," was gone. In her place stood steel. "We are not running again," she declared. Jack nodded firmly. "No, we are not." They began the work of rebuilding, starting by clearing the wreckage. Mara gathered the chairs, set them upright, and swept broken glass into a bucket. Lena carefully untied the remaining hay bundles and spread them out to dry. Jack repaired the front step by sunset. Every nail was hammered in with determination that evening. They took turns sleeping. Jack held the shotgun on his lap, while Mara leaned against the wall, a blade hidden in her sleeve. Lena did not sleep. She just sat close to the fire, her eyes fixed on the door, as if it might suddenly move. At dawn, there was a knock, not loud but steady. Jack answered, shotgun ready. Hank Sutter stood there without hesitation. Word had spread. Hank said, "Some men believe you took what was not yours. Others think you saved her life. I know which side I would be on." Jack lowered his weapon. "I brought nails," Hank added, holding up a sack and planks. "We will need more hands if we are going to fix that fence." Behind him, 3 neighbors waited. One carried wire, another stew. Mara stepped forward cautiously, and Hank tipped his hat to her. Lena remained on the porch, arms crossed, always alert. By midday, a dozen people worked together. Someone brought fresh water from the well. Another offered blankets. No one asked questions. They simply helped build. Caleb Dawes rode in near sundown. He carried no badge or Bible, only himself and the sour smirk that had once made girls shrink away. He said, "Looks like you have a gathering," dismounting slowly. This time Jack did not reach for the shotgun. He approached calmly. Caleb spat on the ground, questioning, "Do you think this changes anything? She is still marked property that you own." "No papers." "She is not anyone's possession," Jack said. Caleb chuckled. "Are you really planning to marry her? Her mother made it lawful so that you would end up with a burnt-out widow and a troublesome brat for your troubles." Lena stepped down from the porch without a word, then struck Caleb across the face so forcefully that the sound echoed throughout the hills. The men immediately ceased their work, and no one uttered a sound. Caleb's cheek glowed a bright red. "You do not get to speak ill of my mother," Lena declared in a voice calm yet fiercely determined, "and I do not belong to you." Caleb smirked. "The little wild cat thinks she is grown up." Jack moved beside her. "She is not wild. She is courageous, which is more than I can say about a man who only arrives after the fire has burned out." Caleb's hand hovered near his waist, but there were too many men standing behind Jack, too many eyes watching him. He did not draw a weapon. Instead, he mounted his horse. "You will regret this," he warned. "No," Jack answered firmly, "I will not." Caleb turned his back and rode away without a backward glance. When he disappeared from sight, Lena faced Jack, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her hands still trembling. "I was afraid," she confessed. "I know," he replied, "but you did not run." "No," she said quietly, "I did not." That evening, they shared a meal by the fire. The stew was warm, the bread soft, and when Mara sang a lullaby from some distant past, Lena rested her head against Jack's shoulder without hesitation. Jack watched them, feeling something deep within his chest loosen for the first time in many years. He allowed himself to lean back in the chair and close his eyes, if only briefly, without fear of what might lurk in the shadows of the night. Later, as the fire dimmed, Lena looked up at him and asked, "Do you think I am still broken?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the old cabinet, pulled out his wife's carving knife, and handed it to her. "It is not about being broken," he explained. "It is about what you do next." She received it softly, the blade shining in the firelight. Then she smiled, not because she was healed, but because she was no longer hiding. Over time, people forgot how she arrived. They remembered her bread, her stories, her determination. When she eventually rode into town years later, driving her own wagon with her name on the ledger, no one called her Wild anymore. They called her Boone, because names must be earned. Fire transforms everything only if something new is ready to emerge from the ashes. This story is not just about being rescued, it is about what follows after. And if you are fortunate like Jack Johnson was, the one you save might just save you in return.